Tonight, the Egyptian military dissolves the parliament and promises new elections in 6 months, while the Google executive, who became a symbol of the uprising, tells his story. I'm Russ Mitchell. Also tonight, killing spree. What led a 23-year-old New York City man to go on a day-long rampage that left 4 people dead and 4 others wounded. Laser danger, how cheap lasers in the hands of kids are blinding pilots and risking lives. And game changer, 50 years of the baseball card game that jump-started the fantasy sports craze.
This is the CBS Evening News with Russ Mitchell.
And good evening. Today marked the beginning of the work week in Egypt, and as life there slowly returns to normal, the new government took some major steps in moving the country toward democracy. Egypt's military leaders dissolved parliament, suspended the constitution, and promised to govern only until elections can be held later this year. We have a team of correspondents on this ever-changing story, and we begin with Terry McCarthy in Cairo.
Good evening, Russ. And Egypt's uncertain march to democracy continued today as the army suspended the constitution, dissolved parliament, and said they would rule the country until elections can be held by September.
In Cairo, people struggle to keep up with the rapid pace of news. As volunteers swept and repainted Tahrir Square, the famous Egyptian museum that is directly on the square announced it had been robbed during the demonstrations. The museum said 18 artifacts, including 2 gilded statues of King Tutankhamun, had been stolen on January 28th. Most people have now left the square, but there were scuffles between the army and some protesters who are still refusing to go.
Here's how complicated things are getting here. In the square, the army is trying to persuade protesters to go. 1 block away from here, the police, who only a week ago were the toughest in cracking down on the protesters, are themselves demonstrating for higher pay.
The policemen claim the beatings of protesters were ordered by their boss, the Interior Minister, and they want him to be put on trial. 5 minutes away, we found the staff of a bank on strike, also calling for their boss to be sacked. With labor unrest spreading, the military announced that strikes will be banned.
30 years of the Mubarak rule are not going to go by without consequences.
Hisham Qasim is a newspaper publisher who thinks the success of the anti-Mubarak protests will embolden people.
More people will go out and demonstrate, saying this is the only way to get my rights.
Many Egyptians are particularly angry about the billions of dollars that Mubarak is said to have stolen, and some are calling for him to be put on trial.
Should Mubarak be forced to give the money back?
Yes, this is not his money, but Egypt's money.
He has to return the money, and I don't think he'll be put on trial, and it's enough for him being ousted in this civilized manner.
And tonight there is news that Ayman Noor, who once ran unsuccessfully for the presidency against Mubarak and afterwards was thrown into jail, has become the first person to announce his candidacy for the upcoming elections. Russ?
Terry, I know it's after midnight there, but we can hear a lot of activity going on. What's happening?
Well, you know, Russ, this square has lost most of its protesters and has actually become a location for tourists, local people to come as revolutionary tourists and see what's going on. It's a huge party here. There's lots of fireworks going on, and cars which are now able to drive through the square again are honking their horns all night long. Pretty much this party goes on here.
Okay. Terry McCarthy in Cairo. Thank you. The Google executive who helped spark the uprising, which led to Mubarak's departure, is now telling his story to reporters. And tonight, he appears on 60 Minutes here on CBS. Harry Smith spoke with him and joins us from Cairo with a preview. Harry, good evening.
Good evening, Russ. Well, you will meet Wael Ghonim tonight on 60 Minutes. As you say, a Google Middle East marketing executive who actually lives in Dubai but grew up here in Egypt. He has quite a story to tell. He, in fact, is one of a number of architects or engineers of what happened on the streets of Egypt this week. 2.5 weeks ago, when this started, did you anticipate this outcome?
When I went on the streets on Tuesday, on the 25th, I was like, wow, it's going to happen. Because the only barrier to people uprise and revolution is the psychological barrier of fear. All these regimes rely on fear. They want everyone to be scared. If you manage to break the psychological barrier, you're going to definitely be able to do the revolution.
3 days after the demonstration started, Wael Ghonim was picked up off the streets by the Egyptian authorities. He was handcuffed, he was blindfolded, and interrogated by authorities for 12 straight days. Now, when he was released, he appeared on Egyptian television, and he wept for the people who had been killed in the streets. After that television appearance, the demonstrations here reached a critical mass, and that's when everything really changed. You'll hear about that. You'll also hear about how he feels and how the demonstrators feel about President Obama's response in all of this, and also a warning for other autocrats and dictators around the world about what their fate might look like in the days and months and years to come.
Harry Smith in Cairo. Thanks a lot. The fast-moving events in Egypt over the past 3 weeks continue to force the Obama administration to do a delicate diplomatic dance. David Martin has more on what has happened and what could be to come.
Jubilation in the streets of Cairo brought relief to the corridors of power in Washington. Given the largely peaceful outcome, not even one of the president's most resolute critics could find much to complain about in the Obama administration's handling of the crisis.
I think they've handled what is a very difficult situation about as well as it could be handled.
But the administration had clearly been caught between its desire to promote democracy and its need to maintain stability in Egypt, and it showed. Early in the crisis, when President Mubarak was insisting he would remain in power until elections could be held in September, President Obama told him privately and the world publicly that was not good enough.
What is clear, and what I indicated tonight to President Mubarak, is my belief that an orderly transition must be meaningful, it must be peaceful, and it must begin now.
But at a conference in Munich, the president's personal envoy to Cairo seemed to take that back by saying it would be better if Mubarak remained in office, at least for a while.
The president must stay in office in order to steer those changes through. I therefore believe that President Mubarak's continued leadership is critical.
Secretary of State Clinton seemed to agree.
It's important to support the transition process announced by the Egyptian government.
But the crowds in Liberation Square weren't listening. When Mubarak gave another defiant speech, once again refusing to step down, the demonstrations reached critical mass. And the next day, Egypt's vice president announced Mubarak was president no more. Other Arab leaders were no doubt listening closely to the administration's statements, trying to figure out where it will stand if and when their rule is challenged. Russ?
David Martin at the Pentagon. Thank you. Of course, the government of Israel has also been closely watching developments in Egypt, with which it has shared a peaceful border since the signing of the Camp David Accords 32 years ago. Dean Reynolds in Jerusalem has more on the view from Israel.
At the weekly Israeli cabinet meeting, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu seized on assurances from the Egyptian military that it intends to honor existing treaties, including the Camp David Accords. Throughout the years, Egyptian governments have kept, nurtured, and advanced the treaty with the Jewish state, he said. We believe it's a cornerstone of peace and stability, not only for the two countries, but for the whole region, a view echoed on the streets of Jerusalem.
They have an opportunity to do something for their future and our future here in the Middle East.
To further the cooperative spirit, there has already been contact between Israel's defense ministry and Egypt's military rulers since the fall of Hosni Mubarak. But it is the very idea of a democratic Egypt that causes concern here. The autocratic Mubarak at least provided stability.
The Israeli military has to take into consideration the possibilities that in a very short time Egypt will change its colors, will leave the Western camp, and will become part of the radical alliance in the Middle East, which is led by Iran.
Israel already has hostile relations with a democratically elected fundamentalist regime in the Gaza Strip led by Hamas. And to the north, Hamas's fundamentalist allies, Hezbollah, have just achieved power democratically in Lebanon, leaving the Israelis uncomfortably sandwiched between the two. One Israeli official spoke for all of them this weekend when he said, "We still don't know what's going to happen in Egypt. The job for Israel now is to encourage democracy and, from its point of view, a positive democratic outcome." Dean Reynolds, CBS News, Jerusalem.
Here at home, even the most jaded of New Yorkers was shocked this weekend by the news of a one-man spree of stabbings and assaults that left a trail of dead and wounded in homes, cars, and subways. Tony Guida has that story.
For 28 hours, Maxim Gelman, police say, was a whirling dervish of violence. 3 people stabbed to death, 1 hit-and-run murder, 4 other stabbings, 2 carjackings, 2 cars stolen, and death threats against a handful of bystanders who crossed his bloody path.
It's so horrendous and bizarre. We have no reason that we can give you as to why he did this.
New York's veteran police commissioner said he couldn't recall anything like it. Freelance photographer John Bodenseek was riding the same subway train on which Gelman was captured.
But it was the panic of people's faces that told me that something definitely was going on.
The killing began at 5 a.m. Friday in Brooklyn when police say Gelman stabbed his stepfather 11 times in the chest with a kitchen knife. The man wouldn't let him use the family car. Some 3 hours later, Gelman, now driving, struck a crossing guard, breaking her leg. 2 hours later, police say Gelman stabbed the mother of a girl he had tried to date. Then he waited more than 6 hours for that girl, Yelena Bolchenko, to return home, stabbed her repeatedly.
He was obsessed with her, and she wanted nothing to do with him.
Within minutes of killing Bolchenko, another hit and run. Police say Gelman struck and killed a 60-year-old pedestrian. 1 a.m. Saturday, Gelman carjacked a cab but crashed it in a struggle. 5 minutes later, he attacked Sheldon Pottinger, stealing his car.
It looked crazy. It looked like a crazy guy. I was saying, oh my, this is it.
Just before 9 a.m. Saturday, Gelman was spotted in Manhattan on a subway heading for Times Square. He stabbed a passenger before 2 transit cops overpowered him. As he was let out of a police station this afternoon, Gelman shouted that he'd been set up. Still no confirmation from detectives about reports that Gelman was high on drugs during this spree. He now faces charges of murder, assault, and robbery. Russ?
What a story. Tony Guida here in New York. Thank you very much. And still ahead on tonight's CBS Evening News, a struggling town in the American heartland getting a boost from China. The bookseller Borders is expected to file for bankruptcy protection as early as tomorrow. That could result in the closing of a third of its nearly 700 stores, and thousands could be laid off. Analysts say Borders failed to keep up with the e-book revolution. Elsewhere, the jobs picture may be improving. New unemployment claims fell by 36,000 in the week ending February 5th to their lowest level in 2.5 years. Cynthia Bowers found one Midwest city that is struggling back to prosperity, one job at a time.
There's no hiding the hardship in Rockford, Illinois. Block after block of abandoned factories line Main Street. This city of 150,000 has lost 15,000 jobs over the last 2 decades. Just last March, the unemployment rate hovered near 20%. So the unemployment office is very busy with job seekers such as Pierre Pertiller out of work for 10 months.
I filled out the applications probably about 20 or 30 places a week.
Carpenter Archie Weber has been without a job for 26 months.
I'll go to China if I can get some work, you know.
That's exactly what Rockford's mayor did. He went to China looking for and finding jobs to bring home. He lured a Beijing-based company here with cheap land on which to build this solar panel factory.
We're sending the message that we're doing business in Rockford. We're not going to feel sorry for ourselves. We're going to go to international customers and we're going to sell them on all the great attributes that we have.
Jobs here average $15 an hour with benefits. The plant will one day employ about 60 people. It's a small step, but those small steps are adding up. Rockford's unemployment rate has dropped to 13%, but the mayor says that's just the start.
We have to look ourselves in the mirror and ask, what can we do to better compete?
And understanding that climbing out of this economic hole will take time and perseverance. Cynthia Bowers, CBS News, Rockford, Illinois.
Just ahead on tonight's CBS Evening News, blinded by the light, how lasers on the ground are endangering pilots in the air. Boeing today officially rolled out its newest and biggest jet. The 747-8 Intercontinental has a wingspan of 225 feet and carries 467 passengers. The first Intercontinentals will be delivered later this year. The FAA is warning pilots of the growing danger from handheld lasers pointed at aircraft from the ground as a prank. The Senate voted earlier this month to outlaw the practice, and a similar measure is pending in the House. Ben Tracy has more on pilots at risk.
Pilot Steve Robertson has been patrolling the skies over Los Angeles for 20 years.
Tower helicopter 6-1.
He's part of the police air support in Glendale, California. Robertson has been in many dangerous situations, but the latest one caught him by surprise.
Instant pain, instant burning.
Robertson's helicopter was hit with a handheld laser beam, shining at him from the ground below.
It felt like I'd been hit in the face with a baseball bat or something similar, and it blinded me for about 15 to 20 seconds.
He couldn't see, so his co-pilot had to take over. The FAA is now warning police departments and airlines about the danger since more and more people, mainly kids, are shining cheap and easy-to-buy laser lights into the cockpits of planes and police helicopters.
These are dangerous. These aren't toys, and they're very distracting to pilots, and we want pilots focused on the cockpit activities.
This past week, Los Angeles police arrested a 14-year-old boy for shining a laser at a news chopper. And in Florida, one man pleaded guilty to interfering with a sheriff's helicopter. He is facing up to 20 years in prison. Last year, more than 2,800 cases of lasers being shined at aircraft were reported, 9 times the number reported by pilots just 5 years ago. Last year, Los Angeles area airports reported 201 cases, the most of any airport in the country, followed by Chicago and San Jose. Most of the cases are kids using laser pointers like a toy.
Costs of green lasers has plummeted in the last few years. The year 2000, they would have cost several $100s or more, and now the same thing can be bought on eBay and elsewhere for around $5.
An expert and author on lasers, Sam Goldwasser, says kids have discovered the green laser, a beam that maintains its brightness thousands of feet in the air.
During landing or takeoff, any kind of bright flash of light is going to be a distraction, and that's the real danger.
Pilots such as Steve Robertson hope parents and their kids understand that while lasers may seem like toys, this is no game. Ben Tracy, CBS News, Los Angeles.
You see a lot of bizarre sights these days, but perhaps this one takes the cake. The singer Lady Gaga arriving like royalty at the Grammy Awards in Hollywood tonight inside a giant plastic green egg. One of her managers said she was incubating some new ideas. The Grammys are on CBS, by the way, later tonight. We'll be back. And finally this evening, big league pitchers and catchers are due to arrive for spring training this week. But for one group of baseball fans, the season never really ends. They're devoted to a board game called Strat-o-matic. You might call it the monopoly of baseball. No! Before there was Madden football or fantasy baseball,
I'm not going to trade your Reyes.
there was Strat-o-matic, where cards represent real players. Their statistics applied to rolls of the dice. A ball game plays out on the board, and you are the manager.
This is what I began 50 years ago. I wanted to be part of the major leagues in my own way.
Math whiz Hal Richmond invented Strat-o-matic, launched in 1961 with loans from friends and his dad, who was in the insurance business.
I said to my father, Pop, lend me $5,000. If I cannot pay you back by the end of the year, I will work for you.
He never had to do that. Strat-o-matic has bred a loyal following, mostly men who form leagues of their own and make social sacrifices.
Like the time when I overslept prom.
Brett Caro started playing at age 10. His first wife didn't like being a Strat-o-matic widow.
I broke it out on her honeymoon, and she's like, really? She's like, I didn't think you brought that. I'm like, honey, this is what you signed up for. And we were divorced about a year and a half later.
Caro was named the ultimate Strat-o-matic fanatic this weekend, beating out 9 other finalists who've played for decades. Retired Major Leaguer Doug Glanville says it was a thrill to see his first Strat-o-matic card.
You're simulating these games, you're getting results that are very true to form.
Over the years, Strat-o-matic branched out to football, basketball, and hockey. And fantasy leagues owe a debt to Richmond.
What has really rewarded me is people coming up to me and saying, you meant a lot to me. And I've also created a lot of bonding between father and son. And these things mean a lot to me.
The game is not completely old school. Strat-o-matic is now available as a computer game, and you can play on the internet and on Facebook. And that is the CBS Evening News. Later tonight, 60 Minutes. I'm Russ Mitchell, CBS News in New York. Katie Couric will be here tomorrow. Good night.